Hello everyone, today we have on a very special guest, Mr. Steve Pottorff of the Carroll County Cooperative Extension Office. Mr. Pottorff, how are you today?
I am great.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. My first question, a lot of people aren't familiar with the Cooperative Extension Office and what they do. Can you shed a little bit of light on what your office does and why it's important?
Sure. I don't quite know where to begin here.
Sure.
A little bit of background about what Cooperative Extension is. Virginia Tech, who actually is my employer, is a land-grant university, and there's three missions that every land-grant university has. And the first one is teaching, of course, the second one is research, and the third one is extension. And this goes back to the Land-Grant Act, which was passed in 1863, called the Morrill Act, and that created the land grants. And the idea of the land grants were that at that time, there were only universities and colleges for people of the upper class, and there was no universities or higher education for the sons and daughters of the working class. So that's why the land grants were created. And I'm very happy to say that I'm a graduate of Kansas State University, which was the first land grant established under the Land Grant Act.
Wow.
The people from Iowa State and Michigan State will say that they're older, but those universities were already established. But K-State was the first one established under the land grant. And it started in 1863. So in Virginia, Virginia Tech is one land grant, and that's who I work for, but we also have two land grants in Virginia. The other one is Virginia State, and that was created in 1890 under the, if you know your American history, under the, where everything was separate but equal. And of course, Virginia State is a historically black college and university. But as an extension agent, I work with specialists from both Virginia State and Virginia Tech. So that's a little bit about the background of it, the land grant. And then in the 1880s, they came along with the Hatch Act, which was to fund agriculture research. And so the second part of the land grant. And so they developed all this wonderful knowledge, but they weren't getting it out to the people of the Commonwealth. So that's when they started Cooperative Extension. And Cooperative Extension started under the Smith-Lever Act in 1914. So traditionally the areas of extension have been agriculture and natural resources, and that's I'm the A&R agent. In my day, it was called Home Ec, but right now it's called Family and Consumer Sciences. So, of course, those are for the adult education. And then, of course, a lot of people know about 4-H, and that's the youth part of Extension. 4-H is part of Extension. And then we also have another area called Community Viability. And as far as what our office does, and what I do, it's pretty wide and pretty varied. I work with a lot of producers, in other words, farmers, a wide range of things, for everything from soil fertility to pasture management, to beef marketing, to water testing, to pesticide recommendations. And I work a lot with homeowners. People ask me about their gardens or why their yard doesn't grow, or the pests that they have. I work with beekeepers, so it's pretty wide and varied what we do.
Do you know Beth Orvek?
Yes, Beth is the one that recommended that I contacted. Yes, I know Beth. Yes. In a little bit about our office here, we actually have 6 positions in this office. Most people don't realize that we have that many folks. I'm the agriculture and natural resource agent. Chloe Sutherland is our 4-H agent. And then Ashley Edwards is the commercial horticulture agent, and Ashley has responsibilities for 3 different counties. She has Carroll County, Grayson County, and Wythe County, whereas Chloe and I, our primary responsibilities are in Carroll County. We have Darlene Edwards, who is our administrative assistant, who we couldn't do anything without Darlene. And then we have 2 program assistants, family nutrition program assistants, and their program assistants are not agents, but they are funded through the SNAP-Ed, which is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And our youth position for that is open right now, and then we have an adult program assistant, Patricia Leftwich, who works with adults. So that's So we actually have 6 people in this office.
Yeah, that's a lot. I looked up your website, your office's website, just briefly, and I saw Miss Sutherland, you, and another, I think it was Miss Edwards. I didn't realize you had other individuals within the office.
Yes, the youth F&P program has been vacant for a while, and then we, like I say, we have Patricia also, who works with adults. Unfortunately, in our office, we mentioned the 4 program areas, Ag, FCS, and 4-H, and community viability. And traditionally, Extension offices always had a family and consumer science agent. And unfortunately, we don't have one in Carroll County. I see a big need for that, but unfortunately, we don't have an agent.
So my follow-up question was going to be if you worked with the high school and middle schools in their family and consumer science classes, but I'm guessing you don't.
No, we don't. Yeah. I do some work with the high school and middle school ag teachers in their ag programs.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So you had mentioned that you went to Kansas State, which is one of the land-grant universities you mentioned earlier. Did you benefit as a youth from any of the Cooperative Extension programs? Is that how you got involved?
That's a really good question. I have to tell you, some of my earliest memories are going with my mother's to what she called unit, but it was actually Extension Homemakers units. And it was a group of women that met, I think they met monthly, and the county home economists would come down and do programs and on the traditional homemaking skills. They did programs on sewing and on baking and so on. And if you look up on the wall up there, which is Carroll County, Virginia Extension Homemakers Council, I'm not quite sure how old that banner is, but again, there was 8 different Extension Homemaker units here in the county at one time.
Wow.
So that's some of my earliest memories. My dad was a farmer and rancher, and anytime he had a question and we talk about it, and he said, well, I need to call the county agent and see what we need to do. Unfortunately, I was not involved as a youth in 4-H, and where I went to high school did not have a high school ag program. When I went to university, I saw a lot of students that had been involved in 4-H and FFA, and I realized I missed out, and that's one of the reasons why I became an ag teacher. I taught high school ag for 5 years, and I taught at a community college ag business for 20 years before I started with Extension.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Where did you teach at?
I taught in Kansas.
Okay, in Kansas.
And the little town I taught in Kansas was in Tribune, Kansas. It's on the Kansas-Colorado border. It was a county high school, like Carroll County, except there were only about 100 kids in high school.
Wow.
There's only about 1,400 people in the entire county.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but it was the county size was about 3 times the Carroll County. There just aren't very many people that live there.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Carroll County is pretty large. It's got 30,000 people. Blaine County, it's around 6,000 people, and I thought that was small, but 1,400, that's minuscule.
Yeah.
Wow. So you became an ag teacher. What did you study in college?
My undergraduate is in animal science and industry.
Okay.
And then my master's is in ag education.
Ag education.
Yes.
And did you pursue those degrees with the intent of immediately entering the ag education field?
No.
Okay.
And I see this a lot with young people once they get out, especially when they finish their undergraduate degree. You don't quite know what you want to do, and I didn't either. And I actually worked on ranches for 2 years before I went back and completed my master's degree. Okay. So I have a lot of production ag background experience too.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that made you a better teacher as well.
Yes, it did. And a lot about human relations and so on.
Yes. Yeah. Very important classroom management skills.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
So when did you move to this area and start working with Virginia Tech?
My wife and I moved here in 2010. I started on campus at Virginia Tech working for Dr. Griffey on their small grains breeding project, in other words, wheat and barley, in the start of 2012, and I started with Extension at the end of 2012.
Okay. Yeah. What encouraged you to get involved with the Extension Office specifically? Your earlier experiences with it? Or?
Yes, very, very definitely, and very definitely. And of course, I was looking for position, and this one had opened up, and I thought, even as an ag teacher, I had thought about extension too. Yeah. And having done both of them, there's advantages and disadvantages of both positions, but I've really enjoyed my experiences as an ag agent.
Mm-hmm, sure. A particularly relevant recent event was the hurricane back in October. And I saw on your website and out in the hall you had some resources for farmers who were impacted by the hurricane. Can you talk a little bit about the role that the Extension Office plays in disaster recovery or in farmer assistance?
Yes. We spent quite a bit of time. There was, of course, I think everybody realizes there were a lot of relief supplies that were accumulated in Galax, and we distributed to folks in Carroll who needed them. Mm-hmm. Most of it went to the folks in Grayson County because they were hit much harder. And Ashley and I worked with the ag agent in Grayson County to distribute those supplies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what we did is information. Extension doesn't provide any funding. And the funding sources basically are the USDA with Farm Service Agency, and we referred folks to those agency also, and then we helped distribute those supplies that were all donated. It was pretty amazing how much stuff was donated. Yeah, tons and tons and tons and tons of hay, fencing supplies, feeds. It was pretty amazing. Yeah,
definitely. And another particularly prominent program within the county that you mentioned, 4-H. When I was in elementary school, we had the 4-H science fair. Yes. And they came into middle school and gave presentations. Can you talk about how 4-H started and it's important in specifically Carroll County?
Sure. 4-H is really fun to talk about how it started. Yeah. And the history of it goes back to the 1920s, and Extension hadn't been very long. And of course, it was designed for adult farmers and for the homemakers. Mm-hmm. But and there really wasn't a lot for children, but hybrid seed corn had come out. And hybrid seed corn, all you had to do was plant it, and it would yield like 10 bushels more than what open pollinated corn would yield. Mm-hmm. But the farmers wouldn't plant it because they had to buy it. And the open pollinated seed corn, they already had it. They could grow their own. So the seed companies thought, and Extension thought too, we've got to show these farmers that's much better to plant the hybrid seed corn. So they developed a project called the Kernel Club, and they gave kids, middle school, high school kids, seed corn, maybe enough to plant an acre, which they did. And then they out-yielded their dad's corn by quite a bit. And the dad could say, well, maybe there is something to this hybrid seed corn. Yeah. And that's how the 4-H clubs got started. Okay. So it was quite educational for the parents. Traditionally, 4-H has been, when I was growing up, it was livestock and gardening projects and so on. And then in the 80s and 90s, it expanded into a lot of different areas like rocketry and a lot of different areas too.
Yeah, definitely. We had all sorts of science fair projects. One year we had a steam engine that a kid and his father had put together. I did a project on throwing cards. Mm-hmm. And so there's all sorts of stuff. We also had another one on bacteria in the water fountains, which was really neat. And the young lady who did that one went to go on to the regional, and I think she won some award. But it's a really good organization that gets people thinking. Yeah.
Who was the extension agent at that time?
I'm not sure. I was third grade, fourth grade. So I was 10. So 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Okay.
2015. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. You had mentioned the earlier memories with your mother with the Homemakers group. Mm-hmm. Is that program still around nowadays, or has it kind of died out?
Unfortunately, it's not. It's not. I do know in this county there's no extension homemakers units. In that little community I was talking about where I first started teaching, extension was a big part of the county, and I think there are there is one or two that are still going, but they're pretty rare anymore. Because what happened, when I was growing up in the 60s, why most women did not work outside the home. And then in the 70s, a lot of women went to work in the workforce, and those organizations kind of went by the wayside. I think it's very unfortunate, very unfortunate.
Yeah, definitely. It's not only, it helps you learn valuable skills, but it seems just like you said, you have good memories with your mother from it. And
Yes.
That's
yes.
something people are missing out on, like you missed out on FFA.
Yes.
So, definitely. Do you do much work with the local FFA chapter here?
Yes, I do. When asked, I did beef quality assurance training with them last week or the week before. Yeah, and I work with the middle school FFA on the Carroll County Fair Stockman's Contest. They host that, and I help put that on.
That's awesome.
With Mr. Carpenter.
Yeah. Miss Orvek had mentioned you to me, I think because of the beekeeping work that you do, and she's also gotten into that lately. Can you talk a little bit about beekeeping? Because that's not an area I'm really familiar with. Sure.
We have, again, in an extension, you have to be willing to learn.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff, a lot of questions I get that when I started, I didn't have a lot of background on it, and it's something that you learn. So one of the things that I was approached after I started with the extension is about a beekeepers group. There were several experienced beekeepers in the area. They said, we really need a beekeepers group. So we started one. I started keeping bees, and it's been very successful. And we meet every month except for in December and January. And we have a lot of people who are new beekeepers, but we also have some folks who are very experienced, and they're very willing to share their knowledge. So beekeeping is not just something that you get bees and start into it. Yeah. It's very, very involved. Yeah. With everybody's heard of the colony collapse and the varroa mites and the pollinator protection and so on, and things that affect the bees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that the Mountain Empire Bee Association?
No, actually it's the Carroll County Beekeepers. Okay. Several of the folks that come to our meetings go to Mountain Empire with Phil, but we have our own group. We did organize with the president and so on, like Mountain Empire does, but I facilitate the meetings, and then the people who come help me come up with the programs.
Yeah, if someone's interested in joining the local bee organization, or they want to start beekeeping themselves, what resources would you recommend to them?
Well, again, we meet the first Monday of the month at 6:30 here at the Extension office. They're welcome to come. I would recommend that if they're interested in beekeeping, to contact a experienced beekeeper. They can contact me, and I can help line up folks to help them. I would do lots and lots and lots of research before you start with beekeeping, because it can be very expensive. Yeah. And it can be very expensive, and sometimes there's a return on it, and sometimes there's not.
Yeah. Do you sell honey personally?
Yes, we do. We sell a little bit.
Yeah. Is that at the local farmers market, so just friends and family?
Actually, just word of mouth.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine it's hard to market that.
I could sell more than what we have.
Really?
Yeah. When people find out it's pure honey, it's locally grown.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of the honey that you see in market, like in the supermarket, it's been watered down with sucrose. It's not pure honey, no matter what it says. And this, all we do is strain it and put it in the jar and sell it.
Yeah. So, tell me a little about that process. How do you go from a hive full of bees to honey in a jar, just logistically?
Well, in those boxes that you see out, those are hive boxes, and then when the honey flow is going on, you put more honey supers on the top, and they have frames inside of those. And then when the bees fill them up, you take those supers off, and then you can take the frames out of the boxes, and then you take a hot knife, and they do what they call remove the cap or decap it. It cuts the cap off of it, and then on the frames, and then you put it in an extractor, which is a big spinner, and it goes around and around and around, and it slings all the honey out. And then it accumulates in the bottom of the extractor, and then we always strain it through strainer, and it takes out all the debris that ends up in the honey.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, that's how you extract it in a nutshell. It's much more complicated than that because you have to run the bees. You have to get the bees out of the honey supers first. Otherwise, when you take it into your house or your honey house to extract it, there's bees everywhere.
Right.
And that's a mess.
So I'm assuming you have a bee suit and you have like one of those smokers that you use?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
That must be is it intimidating walking into a swarm of bees in a bee suit for the first time?
Well, you can be because they're making a lot of noise and it sounds like the end of the world, but especially if they get really upset. Yeah. We had a bear come along last fall and knocked over several of our hives, and I put my bee suit back on and put them back together, and they were not happy at all.
Yeah. Does the suit protect you from being stung?
Most of the time. But they find any little nook and cranny that they can get into.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I will mention too, since you're asking about bees and kind of a PSA, we're within a month or so, maybe in less than a month, we'll be in what we call swarm season. And that's where, for whatever reasons, a queen out of the hive decides that she doesn't like it anymore, and she takes a swarm of bees with her, and they go out of the hive, and then they make a swarm, in other words, a bunch of bees right in one area before they decide they're going to take off and go somewhere else. So if anybody sees one of those swarms hanging on a tree, on a fence pole, a post, and I know a year or two ago there was one at Walmart hanging on the Walmart sign.
Wow.
That be sure that you call a beekeeper that you know, or they can call us at the extension office, and we'll try to find somebody to come and catch those swarms.
Okay, that's good to know. I'll be sure to put that out there. Why do they just get up and leave?
That's a good question. Nobody knows for sure. Okay. So, there's lots of theories. One of them is they're crowded in their hives, and or that's a prevailing train of thought. But that's one of them. And sometimes they just decide they're going to go, and they go. Yeah.
Okay. What's the size of average beekeeper's beehive? Do they have multiple stacks of boxes and hives, or?
Well, that's a good question. Usually in the over winter, there's usually what they call a high body, which is a deep. And then they usually have a one honey super, which is a little bit shallower. And then during the honey flow season, they might, depending on how the bees are doing, how viable that hive is, they might have 3 or 4 honey supers stacked on top of it. I've seen as many as 6 or 7. That's a really good hive.
Yeah, I bet. How does the weather? Lately we've had really cold 20-degree days, and then the next day it's 60 or 70. Does that confuse them or harm them in any way?
Well, fortunately, it's been pretty consistently cold.
Yeah.
And sometimes in late February, early March, it gets warm, and the bees think the winter's over, and they start laying what we call broods, start laying eggs, and then it gets cold again, and they can't keep those eggs warm, can't keep the brood warm, and they die. But fortunately, it's been pretty consistently, you might be warm a day or two, but not for a lot of days. It's been pretty cold.
So it doesn't give them the time to lay the eggs.
Yeah.
Okay. I've read online that sometimes the queens can be attacked by the worker bees. Is that correct?
Well, every hive only has one queen.
Right.
Yeah. And then a lot of times they'll lay what they call queen cells or swarm cells. So most of the time when they lay eggs, it's worker bees.
Right.
But sometimes they'll lay a queen cell. And then if that queen or that new queen hatches out, the other worker bees will kill her because they've already got their queen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what happens if a queen dies and there's not a replacement queen? Do the bees just disperse?
The hive will die eventually, and that's where the beekeeper has to go in and see if there's a viable queen in there or not.
Okay.
And then, see, a lot of times when I talked about those queen cells or swarm cells, a lot of times you can take a frame that's got the queen cell on it and put it in another hive body and start a new hive, start a new colony.
Okay. I imagine it's kind of traumatic for the bees, I would guess.
To make the new hive?
Yeah, to transplant?
No, not really.
Really?
Not really. Because again, as long as the queen stays in the hive, they're okay. They don't really notice if you take a frame or two, as long as you fill it back up with, put in an empty frame back in it. Because bees are really funny. They will, any little space that you leave in the hive, they will fill up with honey or propolis or whatever. They'll fill it up.
Cool. What's the relationship between bees, like you have, that beekeepers have, and the hornets around the area? Do they feud?
They can. Depending on the type of hornet, that's a good question that you ask, because you want to keep the hives very, very viable, and then they can fight off, there's wax moths and there's all sorts of critters, small hive beetles and all sorts of things that would like to, like you say, attack those bees or attack the hive. But if it's a strong hive, they can fight them off. And when it gets to be a weak hive, in other words, there's not enough worker bees, that's when it can be very traumatic, and you can lose your hive.
Okay. I read this year that there are going to be 2 broods of cicadas hatching in the area. Do cicadas mess with bees at all?
Not usually. Okay. Not usually.
That's good. They come in pretty big swarms.
Yeah. Well, several years ago we had a hatch of cicadas, and they were really, really. It was only I only heard them in the Woodlawn area. They weren't all over the whole county, but they were really, really noisy for a while, and then they went back down the ground. You didn't hear them anymore.
Yeah. Do they affect the local agriculture any?
Not really.
Okay. I just knew that they were loud and annoying and came in waves, but I wasn't really sure if they ate anything or.
Yeah, it depends on what brood they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Have you had any invasive or damaging broods in the past in the area?
Not cicadas. Okay. Not cicadas.
Okay.
I think they as I recall, they will eat on tree shoots that are very tender, but they're not around long enough to do a lot of damage. Okay. Because I didn't see a lot of damage.
Cool. Yeah. Something you're seeing in the news lately is the bird flu that's going around and killing a lot of the chickens and forcing chickens to be killed. Does the Cooperative Extension Office nationally play any role in helping farmers and providing resources?
I'm glad you brought that up. Because bird flu, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, the actual name of it, is spread through wild birds. Okay, and I know we don't have any commercial poultry production in Carroll County. You go down off the mountain into Dobson, North Carolina, in that area, they do. But here we don't. But we have a lot of backyard chickens.
Yeah.
A lot of backyard chickens. And the way that is spread is through migrating birds. And that's why, on the eastern shore, they've got poultry operations, and what was in January, they had to depopulate a bunch of them because of the bird flu, and that was spread through wild birds. So I would tell all the backyard poultry people to make sure that their birds do not have contact with wild birds. In other words, no bird feeders, no waterers, and keep them caged up as much as you can, because that's how it's spread.
So what does bird flu actually do to birds that are infected?
It kills them.
Kills them? Okay.
Yeah. I won't go through the gory details, but
sure.
It does.
I see.
And also, we have a lot of folks around here that hunt, especially waterfowl. It's the same thing with waterfowl, that if you hunt ducks or whatever, make sure that you sanitize your dogs and your clothing and so on, that it's not spread that way.
If a human consumes a bird that has been infected with the bird flu but hasn't died yet, are they at any risk?
So far, no. Okay. So far, no. They talk about how some of it has gone to, I think in Texas and several places, they've had a case of bird flu going into humans, but that from a dairy cow. Okay. But it didn't kill the dairy cow. They just cut back on their production, and then the person that got it, they weren't wearing personal protective equipment, and it was spread that way. But most of the time, there's not any. From what I understand, there's no risk to people, and it basically affects older chickens, because if you notice, the price of broilers really hasn't changed that much. Chicken meat hasn't changed that much. It's eggs, because the hens are older than what the broilers are.
Awesome. Okay. I have a couple of questions before we end.
Sure.
What advice would you give to individuals who are just starting out in their life, they're my age, just graduating high school, who are considering pursuing a career in agriculture? Maybe they want to become a cooperative extension agent, or maybe they just want to be your local farmer.
What advice would I have? That's a really good question. I would find a mentor and talk to them, or several because was willing to talk to them and take them under their wing and listen to them because they have a lifetime of experience of what's going on. And I look at the back of the people that really helped me, and I learned a lot from them just by listening and watching. And especially in agriculture, there's a lot of things in agriculture, that we teach, and scientific, it's in the books and so on. But there's a lot of things that aren't. So that's one thing I would really highly recommend, that they find a mentor and an older person.
Yeah, definitely. And then this next question, it's similar but different. What advice would you give to someone my age who's just starting out in the world and they don't know what they want to do?
I would explore a lot of different opportunities, a lot of different areas. Try a lot of different things, even something you think might not like, but don't be afraid to try a lot of different things. Okay. And I'll throw this out there too. I taught 20 years at a community college, and I didn't attend a community college, but I taught one for 20 years. I'm a big believer in community colleges because you got exposed to a lot of different areas in a community college, but there was basically very, very little cost to do that. So if you tried something and it didn't work out, it wasn't that costly.
And if someone's interested in learning more about the Cooperative Extension Office or maybe helping in some way, what resources would you point them to?
Well, anyone in our office would be glad to visit with them, and I would be glad to visit with them also too. And we actually, and I'll throw this out here too, that we actually have an intern position open in our office. I think you have to have had completed 2 years of college, but we're looking for a summer intern. And Ashley Edwards, I mentioned, that's our horticulture agent, was an intern for us several years ago, and she has said that's one of the reasons why she's an extension agent, because of that internship.
Awesome, yeah. And my final question, it could be considered a little bit of a cliche, but that is, what is the meaning of life to you?
What is the meaning of life to me?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Relationships between, I was going to say friends, but between the relationship between your coworkers, your family, your community, and relationships. And you always have to be developing those two. Yeah. And since you asked that meaning of life, that I would encourage everyone to be involved in their community, because we ask for a lot of volunteers and extension to do a lot of different activities, but you get into life what you get out of life what you put into it.
Yeah. We met a couple weeks ago at Rotary lunch.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that's a very big part of your life.
Rotary?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes. Just a couple things that I've done with Rotary. I actually spent a month in Brazil on a Rotary group exchange in São Paulo, Brazil, and that was a life-changing experience, because I'd never been out of the United States that much. So, and I've had the opportunity to attend two Rotary International conventions, to meet a lot of people, and then the club here in Hillsville is a really, really good club. A lot of very good people in there, and very caring about the community. So yes, Rotary is very important.
Yeah. And I'll ask this question too. But what does it mean to you to be a Rotarian and to be a selfless servant?
That you need to give back. I mean, I've been very blessed. Really blessed. I count my blessings every morning, and I've been very blessed, and not everybody is, and that's one of the ways I try to give back.
Definitely. Well, Mr. Pottorff, thank you for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I thank you for asking me. I enjoyed it.